Greetings everyone, I'm Mar, and once again this is my opinion. Been a while since I've recorded an off-the-cuff video for the channel, but I felt for this subject matter it was appropriate. While I don't really bring it up that often on the channel and any of the videos, I've been a fan of true crime for a long time. It mainly started with TV shows like America's Most Wanted, Unsolved Mysteries, Forensic Files, and then spread to all the channel work that ID does. And now, of course, it also includes true crime podcasts like The Trail Went Cold. One area that I have ignored this passion of mine is books. I do have a Jack the Ripper book over on the shelf that I have read in passing, but kind of put it aside when I had to read other stuff. But I am correcting that now in the form of audiobooks, because, you know, I have Audible. I don't get a credit every month, but every few months I get one, and I spend it on audiobooks to look interesting. A couple months ago, I decided to look through their true crime section, see if any popped up. And since then, I started slowly buying them, but didn't have the time to get to them. I know, hashtag lazy ass reader. Well, with how things are right now, I decided I'll start listening to this one. And I picked a good one to start with. It is, of course, Philip Carlo's work, The Night Stalker, The Life and Crimes of One of America's Deadliest Killers. The audiobook is taken from the anniversary edition of the work, so it has some expanded things near the end, mainly where Carlo is addressing some concerns, some minor updates that happened after he published the book. Not as much happened in between when he started research for the case and when he wrote the book, but there was enough to include, mainly reader concerns and questions, along with some transcripts between him and Ramirez, which was interesting. Prose-wise, Carlo's writing is, in essence, if you were to take novel prose and textbook prose, put them together, and they had a child, this is the offspring. And it reads pretty well. I mean, a lot of the times I'm like, wow, this actually, if this was not truth, this would have been an interesting fiction story. The way that he's describing things, mainly when it's from the point of view of characters. Usually it's Ramirez or the investigators. A couple times it's other characters, but for individuals like Ramirez's parents, for the most part, it's omnipotent prose with occasional glimpses into their minds, but for Ramirez and the investigators, it's always point of view, which can be a tad uncomfortable when it comes to Ramirez. So if you have a squeamish disposition, the book is probably not going to be for you, unless you can just put that aside and go through it, because you really get a feel for who Ramirez was as an individual, especially when he was out on the prowl. Carlo organizes all the facts in an interesting manner, starts with some of the earlier murders, the investigation, slowly goes through a lot of them, and then around the time Ramirez got caught, he goes back and actually delves into Ramirez's childhood, which I thought was a nice little touch. Starting with how his parents met, how they courted, how they married, his older siblings, and he touched on something from history that I just learned about more in depth during the last year, thanks to another podcast, and that was his siblings were affected by the atomic fallout from the atomic tests, because when they were born and conceived, America had no idea that atomic fallout was as bad as it was, which is kind of a scary thought to think of now in retrospect with hindsight, but at the time we didn't know how dangerous radioactive material would be. Like this, we just thought you'd have to be within the blast center when it went off, but no, we learned the hard way. And one of his siblings, of course, had a mutation, and we see that as his father gets older and worked on him, he basically became the type of parent he swore he would not be, was physically abusive towards his older children, which, the way it reads, you're like, wow. Because the dad thought he was just disciplining him, but this is one of those things that definitely did not age well parent-wise, because back then there really wasn't a big fine line between discipline and abuse, where now there's a line, you cross over it, and then shame. And just the way it describes Ramirez's dad, it's like, that's abuse, that's not punishment. And the fact that he started it at the police station, it's like, wow, times are different. And while it doesn't mention that he did any of this to Richard, you could tell that this kind of was a form of mental abuse. While that doesn't excuse Richard's later crimes, you could sort of see how from the nurture side of the equation, he ended up the way he was. As for the nature side, given that his family was affected by nuclear fallout, I think that might have been a small little contributing factor. Whether it was still affecting his parents' reproductive material in their lives by the time he was conceived is hard to gauge, but I think there might have been some lingering side effects. Plus, they were older at the time he was conceived. That might have also allowed for the chance of a random mutation, a wrong mutation, to occur when the material met and he was conceived. But it's one of those hypothesis things. But it's like how hemophilia entered the European royal family line. We think it was because Queen Victoria's father was older when he helped conceive her, so it's one of those things that's logical. But this one, I think there's a little less wiggle room compared to that one, but it's still an interesting thought. It's one of those things of nature and nurture being in the right balance, and not that either fully excuses his actions, but you could see how he became the way he was from that, and then slowly going down. Another little aspect that they mention that is like really times have changed there is how his dad and a couple of his family members always are constantly blaming marijuana. It's like, Jesus Christ, don't blame the marijuana. And they didn't really do it, but it seems like they were bordering on blaming heavy metal music, but not fully committing to it. It's like that one Tony Stark meme where it's like, whenever I hear that, it's like, it's not the freaking heavy metal music's fault, it's not the marijuana's fault. Maybe they might have given him ideas or pumped him up before he did any of the thing, mainly the music, but it's not to blame. It's his personal responsibility and his responsibility alone. But with his parents, considering what era they came from, I can see why they would feel the need to blame an outside thing, especially since Ramirez, other than the fact that they knew he stole things or suspected it, it was one of those typical things where it was like, oh, I can't see him do this. He was always very quiet. He was not the type of person to do this. And then, of course, you know, it's the quiet ones you gotta watch. That whole thing. Definitely a textbook example of that. And another thing that, you hear this a lot with other crimes, but just listen to this, it's like, I do not understand these people. That is, the groupies that come out of the woodwork after he's arrested and being tried and all that. It's like, why do these people feel attraction towards these serial murderers? It's like, what the hell? He killed multiple people. He raped multiple women. Scared the crap out of a bunch of people by actually telling them he was a Night Stalker. Which, of course, since the fact he took into that actually helped his reign of terror when he was committing actions. Like, I mentioned several first-hand accounts of people that actually didn't manage to survive, that he would say, I'm the Night Stalker, and they're like, oh, fuck. But back to the groupies, is like, how could you feel a sexual attraction towards someone who is like that? And then, of course, one of the juror members ending up being his fiancée. It's like, how the hell did she remain on the jury? You would think that she would be kicked off long before she got picked to be an actual juror, not a substitute. You would have thought that some of the jury members might have noticed something. I can tell you, though, if I was on a jury like that and something like that happened and it actually went to the path that it didn't end up going, where she tries to deadlock it, I actually would have brought it up and mentioned that she's refusing to convict based on something that has nothing to do with the evidence or whatnot, but if you can even do that. It's one of those little weird things, but it just boggles my mind. He's a murderer. Why are you feeling attracted towards him? I mean, even the Menendez brothers, it's weird, but that one is a little bit more understandable, but even that is still weird. With Ramirez, it's like... Now, one aspect about the case I did not know is that at one point Ramirez was actually going to plead guilty. That I did not know. I thought they was just like a typical serial killer thing, like, I did not do these crimes. You cannot convict me of them. But no, he admitted to some of them, or was going to admit to them just to spare his dad the stress of having to witness the trial. But then he was talked into it, he fought him, and he lost. And then he would only talk about the ones he was convicted of after the fact. And unlike a lot of other cases from this time period, the era of satanic panic, he actually was a full-on Satanist, saying stuff like, praise Satan, hail Satan. So it's not one of those things where you hear Satan brought up in it and you're like rolling your eyes again, like, oh god, another one of these. This time, Satan was in there. And that's another person his family would always want to blame. Yeah, the devil made him do it. In this case, you could kind of say that because he would praise Satan throughout his murders, but still personal responsibility. And if there is a Satan, Satan was probably doing this. But of course, Richard actually would like that, because Richard, from a lot of the things that the book brings up constantly, is that it looks like one of his goals was to actually have a seat at Satan's table. If anything, it'd be like that song by Voltaire, was like, "Come here, Richard, I'm your biggest fan." Pulls out a pitchfork. Welcome to hell. Enjoy the buffet. Another little interesting point was Richard's reaction to how he got caught. I knew how he got caught, which was essentially a form of vigilante mob justice. If the cops hadn't shown up when they did, I think they would have ended up lynching him. Maybe not grabbing a rope, putting it around his neck and hanging him, but they would have beat him to death. His reaction was that it was a Hispanic community that turned him in. He was like, "My own people turned me in." It's like, no, duh. Any community would turn you in if they got in the same numbers and you were running the way you would. I mean, you probably would have been convicted of that stuff alone, even if you got off on the murders, all the stuff you did while you were running from the people that knew it was you and all that. And also, it showed how he was stupid enough to come back. Until he actually was back in LA, he did not know that they were onto him. So that was one question I had about him. Like, why did he come back to LA when they had a description and stuff out? It's like, oh, he didn't know until he was already there. And by that point, it was kind of a little late to get away. He didn't have the resources to get away. Makes sense. And then, of course, aspects of the police investigation when they knew who he was before they got him. It's like, really? You were only checking incoming to Arizona, not outgoing? Nowadays, they would be checking both. Nowadays, Richard would have been arrested in Arizona. But, you know, different era, 30 years ago. All in all, The Night Stalker is an excellent read. If you are a fan of true crime work, whether it be murder or anything else, you definitely should give it a read, whether you actually get the physical book or listen to the audiobook like I did. The narrator, Tom Zingarelli, if I'm pronouncing that name correctly, he reads it pretty well. He's got the perfect voice for a true crime audiobook. And he does add a distinct personality to each person without changing his voice too much. So you can tell when he's speaking as Richard, when he's speaking as one of the investigators, when he's speaking as one of Richard's family members. So he does a good job. Like I said, highly recommend it. I don't know exactly what the rating would be. I'd have to listen to it a couple more times. But it'd definitely be a high rating, so it comes with one of my higher recommendations. Mike, if you're listening to this, you and Josh, this should be one that you guys cover for the podcast if you ever do Richard Ramirez. And as a little aside, one thing I hate about my state is the fact that the appeals process take too long because he ended up dying in prison from natural causes instead of being executed. One of the few things I hate about my state.